Hi, I'm Mrs. Marino, and today we're going to do another read aloud, just like we did it before. But today's read aloud is going to be about Harriet Tubman. We will hear about the Underground Railroad. An underground railroad is sometimes used to describe something that is hidden or secret. The Underground Railroad was not a real railroad for locomotives or trains, but like a real railroad, it helped get people or passengers from one place to another. Passengers on the Underground Railroad were trying to get out of the South and go live in the North, where slavery was not allowed and where they could be free. They usually traveled at night and moved through woods so that they would not be seen, and they wanted to keep their movements a secret from plantation owners and slave catchers. People traveled on the Underground Railroad also stopped at stations for rest. The conductor on the Underground Railroad was a leader, helping others on their journey. Today's read aloud, you guys are going to learn about Harriet Tubman and her work on the Underground Railroad. But first, we need to go over some vocabulary. Remember, I am going to say the word, I will give you the definition, and then I will use it in a sentence. And our first word today is conductor. A conductor is a noun. It is a person who led or directed enslaved Africans to freedom during the Civil War using the Underground Railroad. Here it is in a sentence. Harriet Tubman was a famous conductor on the Underground Railroad. I also have, and here we have Harriet Tubman, and here we have another conductor, which is Frederick Douglass. Our second word is contributions. It is also a noun, and it means money, materials, information, or labor given to someone to help others. Here it is in a sentence. If my parents had extra money, they would make contributions to charities to help people in need. Here we have a picture of the money that is a contribution, can be, but let me tell you, Harriet Tubman gave many contributions. She was a medic, she was a scout, she was a spy for the Union Army. Those were her contributions. Our next word is gourd. A gourd is also a noun. It's a plant whose hard shell fruit is sometimes dried and hollowed out to be used as a tool. Tommy used the hollowed out gourd to scoop out water out of the pond. Here we have a gourd that's on the vine, it's growing, and here we have it in scooped out to be a gourd for drinking, or a drinking gourd. Our next word is passengers. It is also a noun, and this word means enslaved Africans who traveled to freedom on the Underground Railroad. Many of the passengers on the Underground Railroad were caught before they could reach freedom, but many made it to the North. Our next word, rebellious. Rebellious is an adjective. It means resisting or fighting, being controlled by someone else. Here it is in a sentence. Because John would not stay in his room, his parents told him he was being rebellious. Here we have John, but here we have protesters for the Black Lives Movement, and they are rebelling against racial injustice. Some code words for the Underground Railroad. I'm just going to go through a few of them. Tracks, they are the routes fixed by the abolitionist. But here's one that you're going to hear in the story. Stations or depots, those are the hiding places. Passengers. Passengers were called cargo, fleece, or freight. They were the escaped slaves. And stations is another word that you're going to hear in the story, and those were also called depots. Now we are going to get into the read aloud, and I am going to read you a story about Harriet Tubman. Oh, before we go into that, boys and girls, I forgot. I gave you this slide, and this slide shows you some of the routes of the Underground Railroad. They're going from the south to the north and up into Canada. So I need you, when we come back, I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think's happening in this picture? So when we come back, I want you to be able to tell me, what do you think's happening? Where are they? Who are these people? See you in a little bit. Welcome back. Now, boys and girls, I put this slide back up because I think it's really important to look at. I'm going to show you where Buffalo is. Buffalo is right there. And if you'll notice, this is the south, this is the north, and that's a long distance to go. But let me show you. Here's a route that goes up from the south, through Pennsylvania, through New York State, all the way to Buffalo. And what's on the other side? Canada. So Buffalo was one of the last stops on the Underground Railroad. The other image I have on here is a great story for you to go to the library and take out and read. It's called Following the Drinking Gourd. And we're going to learn about the drinking gourd today in our read aloud. So I asked you, what do you think this is what is happening in this story? Who's in this story? Where are they? I believe you're going to find out in this section. And this section is called Tubman Watching Over Groups Escaping. The summer air was hot and heavy. There was no breeze to cut the heat, and the shade of scraggly bushes did little to block the blazing sun. Gnats, mosquitoes, and flies swarmed all around, buzzing and biting. Despite the heat and the bugs, the runaway slaves, filthy from head to toe, their clothes tattered, shredded by thorns and branches, their bare feet blistered and cut, slept hard, huddled together in the tall grass. As they slept, a woman, a conductor, watched and guarded over them. What did a conductor do, boys and girls? They were the ones who led the slaves to the north. Who do you think the conductor is in this? Listen carefully and you'll find out. Even now, as they slept deeply in the bushes, this woman sat upright and alert, her sharp eyes scanning the forest and her ears listening for signs of danger. She knew the dangers all too well. Slave catchers were always searching for runaway slaves, lurking in the middle of swamps, hunting for runaways miles away from the nearest house, town, or road, hoping to catch a group of runaway slaves. The slave catchers were paid great sums of money if they caught runaway slaves, and this woman knew very well that the slave catchers would never give up. This woman stood guard over everyone else was Harriet Tubman. When she grew up, Harriet Tubman did not serve in the big house, and that's the plantation house where the white people lived. Perhaps this was because the plantation owners sensed that she was a bit rebellious. She always did things her way. So from the time she was a young woman, she was sent to work in the fields. And that was a really hard job on the plantation. They plowed and they dug and they cut hay and tobacco and they chopped wood. In time, she became as strong and tough as a person could be. Was Harriet Tubman paid? No, she wasn't paid because she was a slave. She was not paid for her hard work. When the plantation owner died, Harriet Tubman faced a new danger. It was likely that she would be sent off to Georgia, just like her sisters. Georgia was in the deep South, where many a plantation grew cotton, and conditions were worse for the enslaved Africans. Work on the cotton plantations was difficult and performed in all kinds of weather. They plowed the fields with teams of mules, hoed the soil to get rid of weeds, harvest the cotton by hand. The cotton had to be cleaned, picked clean, and then made into heavy bales that could be transported away from the plantation and sold. Harriet knew she had to run away from her life in slavery. The Underground Railroad. Here again we have those areas of where they went. In order to reach freedom, Harriet Tubman needed to use the Underground Railroad. This was not a real railroad. It was a system of secret routes and hiding places to help enslaved people escape from slavery in the South to freedom in the North. If only there had been a real railroad to freedom, then escaping would have been easier for Harriet Tubman and the other runaway slaves. They could have hopped aboard a train and ridden away from punishment, endless work, and the sorrows of harsh life. So in this picture, do we see a train? Do you see a real railroad? So remember that the Underground Railroad was a secret way for slaves to get out of the South, live in the North, so that they could be free. And they traveled at night in the woods and the swamps. There was no actual railroad. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and then I'm going to read. So I want you to listen for the answers of these 3 questions. The first question is, what did a conductor on the Underground Railroad do? The second question is, what were the slaves on the Underground Railroad called? And the third question was, where did they rest? So, what's a conductor? What were the slaves on the Underground Railroad called? And where did they rest? Ready? Listen for those question answers. In certain ways, the Underground Railroad was like a real railroad. On a real train, there are passengers, or people who travel from one place to another. Runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad were also known as passengers. As soon as they ran away from a plantation, they set off on an incredible, difficult journey to freedom. But runaways could not complete this journey without help from a conductor. On a real railroad, a conductor is in charge of the train. On the Underground Railroad, a conductor guides runaway slaves, leading them through the secret paths and taking them to safe houses. These safe houses were known as stations. And like a real train station, they were places where passengers could rest before moving on the next part of their journey. So what did a conductor do? He led slaves. If you thought he led slaves to freedom into the North, you're right. They looked out and they kept their passengers safe. So what were the slaves on the Underground Railroad called? What do you think? Did you hear that? Well, the slaves were called passengers. And remember that slide before? I said they were also called cargo, fleece, and freight. And where did they rest? Well, sometimes they rested in fields, sometimes they rested in the safe houses, sometimes they rested in the stations or the depots. Many different people provided these stations to escaping slaves. People both from the North and the South who thought slavery was very wrong. And even some former enslaved Africans who had won their freedom and wanted to help others. So when they say enslaved people won their freedom, they meant that some of them won it by escaping to an area where slavery was illegal. Harriet Tubman made it safely to freedom in the North using the Underground Railroad. Enslaved Africans like Harriet were free in northern states like Pennsylvania and New York, where slavery was not allowed. But they weren't entirely safe until they left the United States and entered the land north of the United States. And what is north of the United States? What's north of Buffalo? Canada, right. This was because the laws allowed slave catchers to enter free states in the North to catch any runaway slaves and return them to a life of slavery in the South. Harriet did not stay in Pennsylvania very long. She missed her family and friends and could not bear the thought of them remaining in slavery while she enjoyed a free, new life. She decided she had important contributions to make to help those who were enslaved. Contributions was one of our vocabulary words. What did it mean? Well, it could be money, it could be materials, it could be information, it could be labor. It also, Harriet Tubman's contribution was she was a medic, she was a spy, and she was a scout for the Union Army. Those are her contributions also. So she became a conductor on the Underground Railroad and returned to the South 19 more times over several years, risking her life each time to help other enslaved Africans escape to freedom. Harriet Tubman soon became one of the bravest and most famous conductors on the Underground Railroad. Her name became well known among supporters of slavery. Plantation owners put rich rewards out for her capture. They wanted to stop her at all costs. But she kept going back again and again, helping more and more enslaved slaves escape. So who do you think, why do you think, I should say, the plantation's owners and slave catchers knew about Harriet Tubman? Could it be that she went back 19 times? Could it be that she was well known? I think that might be it. Tubman leading people out of a swamp. Harriet was startled by the distant sounds of dogs barking, and she knew the danger was coming near. Wake up, she urged, shaking the men and women. Gather up those babies. We've got to get on a move on. These men and women sprang to their feet with fear and panic. Don't you worry now, she assured them. I know a station not too far from here. We will have to move fast, and we will have to stay on the creek to keep the dogs off the trail. They hustled out of the swamp and splashed up the creek, where the dogs would have a hard time following their scent. An hour later, soaked in sweat and muddy creek water, they arrived in the front house of a small farmhouse. What was a station on the Underground Railroad? What was it called? It could have been called a safe house, it was called a depot, and it was a hiding place for the escaped slaves. So it said that the dogs would sniff along the ground to pick up a scent or a smell of a person. This was more difficult for the dogs to do in water, so that's why they traveled through creeks and swamps. The runaway slaves hid in the weeds while Harriet Tubman slipped through the yard and onto the front porch. She tapped 3 times on the door and waited a moment, and then she tapped 2 more times. This was the secret knock, so the people in the house would know their visitor was an Underground Railroad conductor in need of help. A white woman opened the door. She signaled for the runaways to follow her to the chicken coop. There, she lifted a trap door in the floor and revealed a dark hole. "It's not comfortable," she told them, "but nobody will find you here. I have some stew and biscuits inside and some fresh milk. I'll bring it out as soon as the coast is clear." Their hearts raced as they waited in their hideout, expecting to hear the slave catcher's dogs barking at any minute. But the dogs never came. Running through the creek had thrown the slave catchers off the trail for now, and the runaways were safe. They wanted to sleep, but when the sun went down, they had to move on again, and there was no time or waste, for the nighttime was only a safe time to travel. We'll talk about the drinking gourd when we come back. And this is the drinking gourd. Welcome back. Remember, there was no time to waste, for nighttime was the only time that they could travel. So outside, Harriet Tubman looked up into the starry sky. She put her arm around the children. "See there," she said. She pointed upward. "That group of stars there is it kind of looks like a ladle you could use to scoop water from a bucket. Back where I'm from, they used to call it a drinking gourd. Do you see it?" "I think so," the child said. "Now, see the cup of the drinking gourd?" Harriet Tubman asked, "Look at the two stars at the end of the cup. Pretend you can draw a straight line from those two stars, straight out into space. If you follow that straight out, you will find the North Star. It is always there, right in the same spot, and you can always find it if you know how to find the drinking gourd in the sky." Do you know why that star is so important? "Why?" the child said. "Because the North Star is always to the north. If we follow the North Star every night and keep it in front of us, then it will guide us north to freedom." And heading to the north to freedom is exactly what they did. So now I want you to think. And if you have someone to pair with, you think about it and then you tell someone who's in your house. Well, that's what I want you to do. I want you to think, what do you think a journey of freedom meant for runaway slaves? Think about what freedoms were they hoping for? Think about it. Can you tell somebody? Can you pair with somebody? Well, let me tell you, if you would like to pair with somebody at home or tell them later, you could tell them they wanted to live and work where and how they chose. They wanted to earn money for their hard work. They wanted to live together with family without the fear of separation, being taken apart. They wanted to be free to make decisions about their own lives. So we heard a word in the story, and it was rebellious. And it said in the story, the plantation owners sensed that Harriet Tubman was rebellious. Say rebellious. Yes, rebellious. If you are rebellious, you want to do things your own way and not be controlled by someone else's rules. Let me use rebellious in a sentence. People who protest for Black Lives Matter are rebellious because they rebel against racial injustice. So what can you do? Well, you can talk to your family about places in Buffalo that were on the Underground Railroad. Can you visit some of those spots? I think you can. So, I would like you to give you a quote from Harriet Tubman. And she said, "I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years. And I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." Remember, she did that 19 times. Hope to see you again, because we'll have some more read-alouds. And it was nice seeing you, boys and girls.